Thank you for having me here this evening. I just want to make sure the people in the back, if you can hear me, raise your hand. So it's fine. Okay, thank you. It's already a long evening, so I don't think I'm going to speak for the full time I had in mind, because I would like to have an opportunity to hear from you as well, and to try to respond to some of your questions about the documentary, about the general situation, and also what we can do. So I'll try to limit my remarks to maybe 40 or 45 minutes, maybe even less, and then allow for some discussion. The main, in my opinion, the main paradox of the Israel-Palestine conflict when it comes to the media is that the media typically depict or portray the Israel-Palestine conflict as if it were very complicated, or sometimes they call it controversial. But when you look at the actual historical record, and you look at the documentary record, when you look at the human rights record, when you look at the diplomatic record. So, when you look at the past, the historical record, when you look at the present, which basically means the human rights record, and when you look at the future, which basically means how to solve the conflict, the diplomatic record, when you look at the past, the present, and the future, what's most striking is how uncontroversial and how uncomplicated and how relatively simple the Israel-Palestine conflict is. And so the obvious question arises, why does the media portray the conflict as being so controversial when in fact it's not? And the argument I would make this evening is that most of the controversy that the media portrays, most of it is made up, and it's designed to turn people's attention away from the actual facts, or to create confusion about the actual facts. Now, most of you, even those of you who are sympathetic to the situation of the Palestinians in the occupied territories, I suspect most of you do believe that the conflict is complicated. So my first obligation is to try to convince you that it really isn't. And let me begin with a fairly straightforward example. Most of you have heard of this thing that's called the peace process. How many of you have heard of the peace process? Raise your hand so I know. Okay. I was told I have to be careful of people raising their hands because it may signify a salute, which I'm allergic to. So when I say raise your hand, do not raise it too stiffly. In any event, a subset of the peace process is this thing called the final status issues. How many people have heard that question? The final status issues. Now, okay, not bad. And the final status issues usually refers to those issues which are so complicated that they have to be put off until the final stage of negotiations. Because we're told if you try to solve those issues at the beginning of negotiations, they are so complicated that the negotiations will break down. And those final status issues, as there are some diplomats in the room so they can tell you, but I'll speak for them right now. The final status issues are the borders. What are the borders of Israel? What are the borders of a future Palestinian state? The settlements, the 500,000 Jewish settlers in the occupied territories. Jerusalem, what is the legal status? To whom does East Jerusalem belong? And refugees, what rights do the Palestinian refugees have under international law? So, let's look now at what is said to be the most controversial and complicated questions, those final status issues. It happens that in 2004, the highest judicial body, legal body in the world, the International Court of Justice, was asked by the United Nations General Assembly to decide on the legal status of the wall that Israel was building in the West Bank. And in order for the International Court to decide on the legal status of the wall, it happens they also have to decide on many of the final status issues. So, for example, Israel is building a wall in the West Bank. If Israel has legal title, a legal right to the West Bank, of course it has the right to build a wall there. But if Israel has no legal right to the West Bank, of course it has no right to build a wall there. It could build a wall along its border, that's certainly legal, but not in another people's country. Similarly, the wall that Israel was building and continues to build now, the wall takes a winding route around the settlements, and it brings the settlements on the Israeli side of the wall. So the question then becomes, are those settlements legal? Because if they are not legal, you can't build a wall to protect what's not legal. There's a fancy term in international law which basically means